Welcome to the September 2022 edition of the Crown Upside Down newsletter, a publication about Mary Sue, attorney at law. There's a lot floating around the web about how bad Marvel's latest TV series, She-Hulk Attorney at Law, is. My opinion about that later. So naturally I had to find out for myself. I was prepared to be fair. I'm old enough to know better than to trust angry people on the internet. Some criticism of the show predates its release and focused on the quality of the CGI in the trailers. The show's creators' response to that criticism only fueled sentiments against the show even more. Their response was a bit arrogant and assumed, perhaps disingenuously, a critique of the quality of the CGI was really a critique of She-Hulk's body type compared to the idealized female figure, rather than being aimed genuinely at the quality of the modeling, texturing, and animation, which is what I took the criticism to mean. Listen, legitimate criticism of your work is hard to take, but it's something you gotta listen to and grow from. Deflecting criticism, making a straw man out of the criticism, or attacking the person making the criticism doesn't improve the problem and only worsens people's perception of your work. In any case, I don't care that much about the CGI. It's not great, but it's passable. I didn't expect to see $1 billion budget quality effects, and I certainly didn't get them, but I think there are other areas of the show that make a more significant contribution to its issues. People will forgive poor technical quality in most things if they like what they're seeing. Right, guys? Right? But when they don't, it becomes all too easy to pile on. To start with, She-Hulk has a pretty mundane origin. Bruce Banner, her cousin, has developed an inhibitor that keeps him in human form and not green. They get in a car crash while driving together, which breaks his inhibitor. Some of his blood gets in a cut on her arm, and she's a Hulk now. Not very interesting to me, but the show isn't an origin story, I get it. I've only ever read 1 or 2 issues of the comics, so I wasn't that familiar with her origin going in. That said, it's glossed over pretty quickly so they can get to the attorney part of the show, and I don't think they did themselves any favors here. Almost every superhero gets an origin story for a reason. The interesting part is built in. They're fish-out-of-water stories where we get to see the character deal with the challenges and adversity that comes with a life-altering change like superpowers. With She-Hulk, she just sort of becomes, and not in a good way. More about that later. Missed opportunity in my opinion. If they wanted to focus on her as a lawyer, they should have just started in media res. In terms of her origin and dealing with the adversity of newfound superpowers, this show has none of it. Whereas it's taken her cousin Bruce 15 years to get the other guy under control, Jennifer is instantly good at all things Hulk without any training or effort whatsoever. The kind of character who is instantly good at something without much effort, if any, is a trope usually reserved for fan fiction, and bad fan fiction at that. She-Hulk is a Mary Sue. The writer usually intends for this kind of character to be special or interesting because of her capability, but the actual result is an intensely unlikable and unrelatable character. All the challenges that could have made an origin story interesting is instead hand-waved away, and to make matters worse, it's done so in an intensely self-centered and tone-deaf way. Jennifer explains that she can control her anger so well because she does so every day. Every time someone catcalls her, or condescends to her in the office, she pushes her anger down. An ironic claim considering the writing in the show could definitely have used some coaching. And poor Bruce has to sit there and nod in agreement as his cousin equates facing a literal existential crisis in the form of fighting a purple alien who wiped out half of all life in the universe with being catcalled. She-Hulk, in other words, is a selfish character lacking perspective or empathy. And of course, to make matters worse, the show is also completely oblivious to its own setup. Having just proclaimed herself so great at controlling her anger, Jennifer hulks out in the very next scene and punches her cousin in the jaw over something as petty as trying to convince her to stay and complete her Hulk training.
You're doing the best you can, and you can do better.
Enough dialectical behavioral
Nonsense. Completely undermining what she just said about controlling her anger. Jennifer Walters, She-Hulk's alter ego, is supposed to be a strong feminist. Stepping backwards a little bit, let's examine what the show considers the hallmarks of strong feminism. After she's in the car accident that grants her Hulk powers, Jennifer wanders lost until she happens upon a roadside bar. rather than making the perfectly reasonable and understandable move of going straight to the bouncer at the front door for help after surviving a car accident. She's still a pink-skinned human at this point. She, for some reason, decides she needs to sneak in the back door. She makes her way to the restroom and starts cleaning up when 4 partying women walk in. If you thought your reaction to seeing a barefoot woman wearing torn and bloodied clothes would be to immediately seek medical help, you would be guilty of having a very non-feminist reaction. No, what you should do is give the woman a pair of high heels, a fancy feathery pink jacket, and do her makeup. See? Much better than seeing a doctor. The writers apparently thought this would be funny instead of horrifyingly misplaced, absurd, and inhumane. Nor did they seem to think that stereotypical female things like makeup and shoes would undermine their feminist message at all, or be completely unsuited to the tone of the scene and what the main character has just gone through. I guess shoes and makeup are only stereotypes when men write them. Breaking the fourth wall is a thing that happens in this show, and boy is it awkward. The show's creators made the point that She-Hulk was breaking the fourth wall in the comics before it was cool. This may be true. The first She-Hulk comic came out in 1989, and the first Deadpool comic, another character famous for breaking the fourth wall, didn't make its appearance until a couple years later. Regardless, this show isn't The Office or Parks and Rec, she isn't Deadpool, and it's just not done well. Vanity Fair made the point that Jennifer Walters only breaks the fourth wall intermittently, with long stretches without the device to the point where you forget it's part of the show, which makes it jarring when she suddenly turns and talks to the camera. Jessica Gao, the show's writer, claims she wanted to break the fourth wall much more often and had to be held back. Perhaps she should have been pushed forward a little more, or the idea should have been dropped altogether. Regardless, I don't think you get to complain that your character was doing the look at the camera thing first if you don't do it very well. She-Hulk also suffers from overly supportive friend syndrome. Jennifer has a sycophant for a friend who geeks out every time she hulks out, and whose sole purpose, at least after a couple of episodes, is to support the main character in everything she does. I talked about this in my last video on Ms. Marvel, so I'll leave it at that, except to say this kind of secondary character isn't very interesting. Far from emphasizing how interesting the main character is, by contrast, surrounding her with boring friends makes her boring. To say something positive about the show, I did not have the same complaints about Episode 2 that I had about Episode 1. Jennifer actually faces some adversity she can't just handle capably, and Bruce's line, "I'm literally a different person now,"
So many years ago, I'm a completely different person now. Literally.
is a bit of welcome self-referential humor that got a chuckle out of me. That said, I'm not sure I'll tune in for any more episodes. One important precept, not just for entertainment, but for life, and especially in relationships of all kinds, is the way it is in the beginning is how it will always be. Remember this if you're ever haggling over a contract for a job. She-Hulk has just done too much poorly in the first episode to give me faith that it will ever get better and not just retread the same mediocrity and tone-deaf writing. I suppose it could be interesting if Jennifer's arrogance and dismissal of Bruce's help and training in the first episode comes back to bite her later, but based on the writer's apparent lack of awareness of their own work so far, I don't think I'll stick around to find out. The full audiobook for Planet Mission Part 1 is up on YouTube now. Go give it a listen. Subscribing and liking the video is free and it helps me out a lot. Links to my Amazon page, Facebook page, and Instagram are in the description. You can also subscribe to the email version of this newsletter. You get a free short story as a bonus for signing up when you do. Sorry this newsletter is a few days late. My whole family came down with an illness over the past few days. You can probably guess which one without me saying, and I'm still recovering. Happy Labor Day to everyone in the US, and to everyone going back to school. Best of luck.